strikes me as I've listened to the questioners and the chairman and others have an exchange with you witnesses that it seems to me the question of vision has come up a number of times. What do we really want the space program to do? Where do we want to go? How do we invigorate our young scientists to be excited about working at NASA and so forth? And I have thoughts about a vision, and that's not necessarily certainly not the point of this hearing, but I know that you all have become very familiar with the culture at NASA, the process that NASA goes through, the experts that are employed there. And I'm wondering whether you feel that NASA can organizationally be capable of defining its vision, a vision, an adequate, thoughtful vision, or the future of the agency. Is the organization perhaps too risk-averse at this point, given the seriousness of your report, to define some sort of a grand national vision for human space flight? It's a little theoretical, but I think it's a valuable theoretical question to have answered, because it sort of defines where we're headed with respect to the agency and human space flight. I mean, my sense is maybe we ought to be looking at the moon and have a sort of lunar expedition policy that guides us. There's great science, I think, that can come from there, but there's Mars and there's other places. So I'm wondering if you could answer those questions for the record and for me.
I think we ought to ask all four board members, but I'll answer very briefly and say I have confidence in NASA. I think it's a great organization. I think they are capable of proposing and staffing a national vision, but of course NASA's vision doesn't count. We were very careful to say it has to be an agreed vision. So it has to be your vision and the White House's vision. I don't believe NASA is too risk adverse, or that they are in any kind of a defensive crouch as a result of this accident. I think they're fully capable of leading us and proposing us, but they can only propose. My view is that NASA is fully capable of that challenge. I'll ask my colleagues to help.
I agree too. The issue, though, is that one can have quite a few visions. There's so many things, as some of you have already talked about today, whether from the robotics issues to the manned spaceflight issues, as well as should we be going to the moon at this point, or should we be thinking, well, how about putting space stations further out? Someone mentioned the vibration points too as being places. So the hard part is I think we can all come up with visions of them. The problem is, how do we constrain them? Because there's only so many things we can do. I think it's important for the country to have one, because it really does have a lot of secondary issues, secondary things. And one of the main one that pops to mind is one we've been talking about here, and that is the education things. We need to stimulate people to start thinking about these very technical issues and want to go into those fields and work on them. But picking what the vision should be, oh boy, I'd like to be a part of picking it, but I'd be very hard to say this is the one and only thing we should be doing.
General Hess, do you care, or Dr. Widnow?
Oops, put the button. Yeah, when you raised the issue of vision and NASA constructing a vision, I wrote down the word partner. And then I wrote down the word tough. I think NASA needs a tough partner. If I had to make a comment about NASA, it's not that they are risk averse. It's they have often overreached technologically. They have been over optimistic in looking for the leapfrog in accomplishing certain goals. And my board members basically said it before I said it. An unconstrained vision is not a vision. NASA needs a tough partner to rub right up against and get a common agreement about what the vision is that is matches the resources that the nation is willing to provide to accomplish this vision. So, tough partner.
Well, I thank you.
That would be you guys.
Yeah, I understand, and I think we're willing to be partners. I just culturally, I'm wanting to be sure. I think we look to the experts there to make these judgments. Let me ask a question on behalf of the committee that, for the record, that I hope will be helpful to all of us, if I may. The report provides 29 recommendations and 27 observations. Quote, please explain the substantive differences between an observation and a recommendation, and I'm wondering whether NASA can ignore the observations and still be in compliance with your report.
Well, we started off with this. The first draft of this report back in June was 1,000 pages, and after some hard negotiating, I got it down to 400 pages. What you see now, 248 pages, is after some more arm twisting, and we had to do some prioritizing. The observations they're all true, they're all serious, they all are potential danger points for maybe some future accident, but they weren't talking about this accident. And that's kind of how we made the differentiation. We think that they are offered as serious matters. They are offered as things that we observed and as we saw as we traveled around and talked to people. They are potential problems for NASA. One of them could be the cause of a future accident. So they do need to be addressed by NASA, but they aren't related to this accident. So
you want the recommendations followed up on and responded to, but you want the observations to be noticed and acted upon, I assume, as well.
That is correct. That is correct. As a matter of fact, we say in there that NASA must take action on these things.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the extra time.
Thank you very much. Vision has been thrown around very loosely today. We all want vision, Proverbs. But the vision, you've got a tough partnership is very important, Dr. Widnow. And part of that vision has to include what you hope to accomplish, at what cost, and at what risk. So we can talk about vision all day. I still remember Martin Luther King's speech of his vision, a nation where people are judged not by the color of their skin, but the content of their character. And we're still not there yet. So the vision we need is a vision where the executive branch and the legislative branch are the senior partners. NASA is part of the executive branch. Well, enough sermonizing. Let me get to a couple of very pertinent questions on my mind. You've made some specific recommendations, the board has, and NASA has established a new safety center at Langley. And certainly it was established before the report was out. I know you've had interaction with NASA. But can you tell us, Admiral and members of the board, whether you believe that the new center reflects any of the changes you've recommended in the report? Admiral?
The way I would answer that is that I would suggest that if one were to write down the specifics of our recommendation for this independent technical review authority and make out a checklist or a template that the emerging and still changing engineering and safety center at Langley does not match up, not exactly. That doesn't mean that it's not good and they shouldn't do it, but it does not match up exactly. And my board members, we got it right? Yeah. I don't want to speak for them, but I think we're in agreement on that.
You had any conversations with Administrator O'Keefe? Should this be considered, as I feel it should be, a work in progress?
Yes, that's my understanding, that they haven't even agreed on their charter. They haven't agreed on
fine. This is not the be-all and end-all.
That's correct.
All right. Next question I want to ask is...
Mr. Chairman, can Dr. Widnow stick a...
Oh, by all means.
Let me
never
just add
silence
something. No,
Dr. Widnow.
Absolutely. Just let me add that I consider safety to be a professional or technical discipline. And it would be not a bad idea to have an organization. The one that's described at Langley I would view as almost like a research organization to look at the fundamentals of safety as a technical discipline. That is independent from the line organization that we have suggested that would have a function in the actual conduct of operations. So both organizations could exist and be mutually supportive.
Thank you. And I just want to make sure we have the record clear so we don't have a presentation from NASA that says, well, look what we're doing at Langley. Boy, we've addressed the problem. But that's only a very small part of the problem. This is a quickie, Admiral Gaiman. I want to get it on the record. In the section of the Space Flight Operations Contract between NASA and USA, there's a section of the contract dealing with the fee reduction for catastrophic loss. That provision requires the NASA contracting officer, in conjunction with a board of investigation, to make a determination as to the cause of the loss. There has been some confusion about whether the Columbia Accident Investigation Board is the Board of Investigation referenced in the SFAC. Is the Columbia Accident Investigation Board the Board of Investigation referenced?
No, sir.
All right, thank you. Next, that's an easy one. In Chapter 9, the board talks about designing the shuttle replacement without regard to cost. But isn't that just a recipe for getting into the same problem we did with the shuttle? Does it make sense to design something without cost parameters and then reassess it once we know real budget projections? Doesn't that just encourage the disconnect between ambition and resources that you cite in the report?
I'm sorry we didn't make ourselves more clear. What we were suggesting, what we were doing there is criticizing the current process of our wonderful democratic institutions of trying to design the next vehicle with a start and stop kind of a process before there was complete agreement on what the vehicle is supposed to do. And what we suggested is that the right process would be, we have a good, healthy debate on what we want to do in space. We agree on what it is we want this vehicle to do. Then you go into the design process and the cost process. And what we suggest is that it would be a wonderful leap forward if you agreed that what it is we want to do is to get into and out of orbit safely. And that would be a giant leap forward. And then once you decide what it is you want to do, then the design and the cost of the vehicle follows that. I'm sorry we weren't clear on that, but we recommend that you and the Senate and the White House, first of all, agree on what it is you want this vehicle to do, then go into the design process. We're hearing things about people who even got pictures of this vehicle, and we haven't even decided what it's going to do yet, and that the process is reversed.
Thank you very much for that clarification. Now, here's the deal. We have promised our very distinguished panelists that we would have them out by 2 o'clock. Mr. Rohrbacher, you're next, followed by Ms. Jackson-Lee. Mr. Nethercutt, do you have anything more? All right. Mr. Rohrbacher is recognized.
As we move forward with certain decisions that need to be made and our discussions with NASA, it will be helpful to us to have certain issues totally clarified. And I think this is pretty clear, but I want to ask you very specifically, is it the recommendation of the Commission that if the space station can be supplied by an alternate system rather than the space shuttle, that it should be supplied by the alternate system?
It is our recommendation that we separate the people from the cargo as soon as possible.
As soon as possible. Mr. Chairman, I'd like you to note that answer. That is
duly noted.
Something that we've been receiving a lot of resistance from NASA, for safety reasons and every other reason. It sounds like clear to us. In terms of using the shuttle, when necessary, would the Commission agree that the shuttle would be necessary to finish the construction of space station?
We believe that the shuttle can be safe, can be operated in a more safe manner than it is now, easily for another decade.
Thus, Mr. Chairman, in making a decision as to whether to move forward and finishing the space station, the shuttle, the Commission is deciding that it would be safe, or at least we can change and develop the situation so that the shuttle is safe in completing the mission of building the space station.
That opinion is duly noted.
Right. Finally, is it the finding of the Commission that funding was not a major cause of the Columbia tragedy? That is it your finding that even if we would have funded the shuttle at a higher level, that the complacency that you've spoken about in your testimony may well have continued, and that was an issue at least as big, if not bigger, than the any funding issue at hand?
The board did not evaluate the relative contribution of the factors that we listed, but constrained and squeezed budgets was a factor in the it was a contributing factor to this tragedy.
Okay, so funding was a contributory factor, as was, of course, what you've been saying.
A lot of other things.
A lot of other complacency within the attitude, et cetera.
The gentleman will yield.
Certainly.
There's always culpability. We're all partners to this venture. We all have to share our part of the responsibility. But let me tell you, if we'd written a blank check to NASA, that wouldn't have changed the decision on the manner in which the request for imagery was treated. If we had written a blank check to NASA, that wouldn't have changed the manner in which they responded to the repeated instances of foam, debris falling. So while we are not going to just swipe our slate clean in the legislative branch, as I enumerated earlier, and your report put out very specifically, it was within NASA that decisions were made to transfer funding out of the program. It's within NASA that the decision was made to not give the proper responsibility, authority, and independence to the safety function. So I don't want this to be misinterpreted by anybody as this is an apology for the Congress. We share part of the responsibility. We've all got to stand up to that. But the fact of the matter is, changes are needed. They're needed, and they're clearly articulated in your report. And I'll have some closing comments in a moment. You finish, and then we'll go to Ms. Jackson-Lee.
And finishing up on that area, the funding, the institutional process of funding may well be what you were looking at in terms of the way we fund NASA, not necessarily the specific funding decisions made by the Congress. I just for the record as well, there are numerous occasions which I have heard members in this committee on both sides of the aisle talk to people who are sitting right in the spot that you're in right now and say anything that in any way affects safety should be taken care of without regard to budget, and that we will back you up if you tell us that this is the reason you need that money. However, Mr. Chairman, there are internal deadlines that are made based on funding that's already agreed to, and those internal deadlines of NASA sometime are reflected in the decisions we've made at funding certain projects.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rohrabacher. Ms. Jackson-Lee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The importance of this warranted me staying with you, Admiral, and I do not, and the board, I don't want to keep you away from tasty cuisine. And I thank you very much for your patience. I want to just reinforce my earlier remarks with respect to reciting the names of those who lost their lives in Columbia 7, because this is about them and their families. And particularly it's about them because there are how many in line following them, meaning astronauts in training, who would do it at a drop of a hat, meaning go into space ready, courageous. And I hope that my colleagues will join me in sponsoring the Congressional Gold Medal that we have now filed to be able to honor them. But I believe it's important to restate their names and to note their families, because I don't think one family member publicly did anything to suggest that we should not continue whatever our vision and our mission is. And I think this question of probing responsibility is not simply finger-pointing, and I think the chairman has just said we all can stand in line right now. And I want to put on the record that when I made the comment about safety, it was in 1999 where there was a $1 billion cut through the appropriations process out of this Congress for the NASA budget. I might suggest that the belt-tightening was their way of saying we can handle it. And I want to get back to, you were in the middle of saying the word accounting, and I'd like to be able to have you answer that along the lines of your role militarily on how you would deal with that. And I'd like Major Hess to comment that if a tragedy of this moment occurred, I'm recalling the submarine issue with the Japanese fishing boat and the sort of scenario that occurred. I'd appreciate your comment on that. I also would appreciate a comment as to whether or not we should be concerned about the International Space Station. Is that susceptible to the same management problems that tragically help, if you will, result in the Columbia 7 tragedy? And I'd also like to find out, as I look at this report globally, you're not condemning human space flight. There's vitality to humans going in space. I didn't see that in the report. I don't want to miss it, and I would appreciate you commenting on the value of that through your work and interviews with individuals. Admiral, you were in the middle of the accountability question and who we should hold, how we should hold individuals responsible.
I'll let General Hess, who has conducted many safety accident investigations into aircraft accidents, and comment on that. But generally speaking, in our military experience, we conduct two separate investigations. And one investigation does have an accountability, responsibility kind of a goal, and the other one is an investigation to really find out, no kidding, what happened in every single contributing cause that may have contributed to that accident, in which we assure people that no accountability will be, there'll be no punishment, no intimidation of any witnesses or anything like that. And what we tried to do in this investigation is to roll those two kinds of investigations into one, in which we brought out the performance of people, we documented it in our report, and if the proper authorities want to hold those people accountable, I think they should. We are not escaping the issue of accountability. We just decided that we aren't the judges, but we were the investigators, so we put it all in the report. Ms. Jackson-Lee, we did not examine the International Space Station program, but I suspect that many of the things that we unearthed in this investigation probably might be good to look at in that program also. Not that it's not well run and not well managed. I have no evidence whatsoever to indicate that it isn't well run and well managed. But if we have cultural problems with communications and openness and the role of engineers and things like that, it probably is in more than one program. General Hess, do you want to comment on the military, how military would handle a loss of life like this?
Yeah, I think that there's a good way to approach the answer to your question is that when we investigate accidents, it's very likely that outcomes can kind of fall in three general areas. One, if you find culpability on the part of leadership, a removal from position is not an unheard of event. Two, if you find that in the case of, let's say, a pilot flying an airplane and he flew it outside the rules, that pilot going to a flight evaluation board to determine whether or not he retains his wings as a result of that event is not unheard of. In the cases where, for example, there is a mechanical failure, for example, F-16s being a single-engine airplane, we were dropping them out of the sky left and right in the late 90s because of mechanical failures. Those are problems that you go back and you fix logistically, where there's not any personal culpability in the operation. So accountability is part of what we do, and we think it's very, very important because it helps us continue to follow the rules.
General, you have had the last word. We're going to your gentlelady's time has expired.
Thank you,
and
Mr.
we're
Chairman.
going to be faithful to our promise to our distinguished panelists to have them permitted to exit. And incidentally, the fine cuisine, they each grabbed half a sandwich.
That you provided, Mr. Chairman.
Here, yeah.
Mr. Chairman, would you yield for a moment so that he could have the last word? I'll pose it to you.
Who is he going to have the last word?
You indicated this witness, but I'll pose it to you. I assume Admiral Gaiman say that we would be able to speak with them directly one-on-one and have the opportunity to visit with at least Admiral Gaiman and maybe some of the board members.
Right now. I mean, let me tell you, it's been my experience, and we're finished now because we're going to be faithful to our promise to the panelists. It's been my experience that this board, Admiral Gaiman, every single member of the board, has been accessible.
Great, that's all I need.
Very receptive to any requests we've made of them. Let me tell you, I just want to stand and applaud you for what you have done for us and for America. We're now adjourned.